The first tap of a conductor's wand. The first rivet in a mile-high tower. The master link at the genesis of a never-ending chain. The moment a single empty canvas meets a singular master stroke. There is no one thing. Because now, there are many. Because soon, there will be more. Because one is ever the beginning. Like the first link in an infinite chain, or the first rivet in the tallest skyscraper. The master stroke is found in the masterpiece. What will you begin?
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 23rd episode World Blockchain Roundtable. Hosts for today, thanks for joining us, are Greg from Rivet, Dave from Din.social, Ross from Global Crypto Press, Jeff McCabe of Divi, and I'm Joe, architect of Dragonchain. Quick update on last week's show. All of the hosts will receive 166 lot, that's layer ownership tokens in the World Blockchain Roundtable layer. And every topic contributor will receive 41 lot. So it's perpetual passive income, free edits, future governance votes, etc., etc. The theme this week was selected by the community, and it is blockchain in encryption. I think that's right. So you guys all ready? How's everything going?
I'm doing great today. I feel 1,000% better than yesterday.
Good deal, good deal. You still had the show yesterday, so that's good.
I did, yeah. Well, I like to do things that I say I'm going to do, even if it's hard.
Yep, way to do. So let's go to the first topic and see what we get. Okay, let's say here, Jacob Wayne. When companies say that their product is encrypted, how does the general public know that it actually is? For example, WhatsApp says encrypted, and I've read many times that it's actually not, that Signal seems to actually be encrypted. Who wants to weigh in first on this?
I think that's pretty easy to verify if it is encrypted or not. The big mystery, I think, with all these apps is, do they give themselves access to the key to decrypt it? And that's what nobody really ever knows.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot and talking to some friends of mine with, because people are using Signal more often, which is great. But there's still a server there, and there's still like a company and people that, theoretically could, you don't know, they could be a man in the middle. You have no idea, right? Maybe they got served by some government agency that said, let me read all the things. And they said, okay. It's never been easy for like public free things that people have access to. There's always been this trust of like, oh, okay, this person's promising me that it's encrypted, that kind of thing. And that's what I like about blockchain, where you start taking these concepts that do require trust and you're like, okay, how do we do this in a way that's like no shit trustless? And there's an app that I use a lot called Session, which is a lot like Signal, but there's no phone numbers and there's no servers, and it's a blockchain, decentralized, open source, in onion routed encrypted messaging. And it's one of those examples of what's coming down the pipe. Now it's already in the App Store and stuff, but it's a technology that's taking what's sort of trustworthy and sort of like, as long as, it's better than usual, better than most, but like taking it one step further and saying, okay, now you really don't have to trust anyone.
Right.
Like, of course, you could still have a virus on your phone and somebody could have a screen reader. You can't get around that. End-to-end encryption is only as good as the endpoints. But, we're doing huge strides in that direction. And that's a great question because you don't know. Really, you don't.
Yeah. It helps to know what the source code looks like. That's a big thing. So if you can rely on that kind of claim a lot more readily if you're dealing with open source software. Because you can see exactly how they've constructed things, and obviously you won't be able to, still know if someone's keeping that private key and sharing it. that sort of thing is going to still be on the word of the issuer of whatever product you're using. And that's really, I think, the key point for me when it comes to this question is there's no such thing as perfect security, right? You will always be facing a situation where it's a matter of how much your adversary is willing to spend and how much effort they're willing to put towards it to break through a thing's security, regardless of what that security is composed of. So encryption is one way you can secure communications, but there are a lot of other things that people have to do in order to make it more and more secure. And it's a question of trade-offs, and it's also a question of effort and time and expertise when it comes to breaking through those.
Yeah, I had a conversation once with Kevin Mitnick, the world's most famous hacker, and he told me they have never failed to break into a system when they've been hired to do it. And they usually do it by the really difficult ones. They usually do it by like going onto social media and making friends with one of the top engineers, like wife or girlfriend, and then they get them to talk them into doing something by putting something on the home computer or the phone of that. It's very convoluted what they do. It takes them a while, but they always succeed. It's just a matter of how much effort you want to go into.
That's a great demo. If you read his books, they're very interesting because they're never about the encryption side of it. It is about getting around what's put in place with humans, because humans are, and they're very brilliant ways that he'll work on the psychology of people to say, look, I'm a new guy and I'm over here and I don't know how to do this. Can you tell me? And then they unload info, so he now knows who to talk to next with a name. And it's like he can just make his way in, and it's really amazing. And by the way, there's so many things here because you have to think about the channels. In the most extreme, if you really need something, let's say some business thing that really, really needs to be private, private courier, or handing yourself. It's kind of crazy, but you're only as secure as the channel you're on as well, because even with signal that's going through a telco or some server one way or another, and even if it is purely encrypted end to end, that's just a time. There's potentially some safety in time depending upon what is known about the encryption, that at some point that encryption will fail, and whoever has stored, and it is being stored, you have to guarantee that whoever stored that info is going to be able to pull it apart. And then the other side is, as mentioned, open source. And I got into a conversation on Twitter with Vitalik about that with Zoom, because if any of you know what happened with Zoom, it blows my mind that government agencies are using it, that people are using it at all, because they were not only listening in on conversations. I have to assume everybody's listening in on everything, but they were actually they had I believe some dissidents, some Hong Kong, some people that were having a meeting, organizing something, and someone pops in from the CCP unannounced, uninvited. I'm like, wait, what? Really? I can understand them listening in, right? I would assume that, but to pop in to critique these is just crazy to me. And so they announced, I can't remember what it was. They announced, that thing where we said that it was encrypted. It wasn't. Yes, we admit. Sorry. It is now. And Vitalik would say, this is a great step in the right direction. I'm like, wait just a minute. This is Vitalik saying that it's a good thing. And I understand that. It's a good thing when a business philosophically goes the right direction. But to think that you would trust a business that had already done all of those things, that now just says they're doing the right thing.
Did they just come out and say it, or did they do anything?
They didn't do it. There was no open source. They probably had another release. It's like, we're going to hide the thing that shows, that let people see that we were, doing whatever we were doing. But
we had a point released so that we can say that we did something.
It blew my mind, because that is the key. You have, and a lot of people, it doesn't matter, right? Well, on the one hand, we have a policy against using Zoom, and I hate to keep picking on Zoom here, but it isn't because we're worried about the information that would be leaked if they're listening in. It is because they were known to have backdoors on if you install the apps and stuff. And so we don't let any of our people use it for any official business. And what do I say? It's just a weird thing, because that's, if they wanted to, they could keep parts of it closed source, right? I mean, it's a commercial company, but to at least say, look, here's how the communications are working, because everything else ends up for a normal person being, oh, well, Snowden said Signal's great. I'm gonna, he's an expert. I'm gonna use Signal. The open source is what is really needed, though, because I would rather have an expert review the open source and do network, watch it if there's any phone home, if there's any weird stuff going on. That's the type of stuff that you really need to do, but it's really hard.
Yep. Well, there's the other piece of that too. Like, they may have an open source code base, but how do you verify that that's the code they're actually deploying?
Right. Well, there are
and
ways
a lot of that
to do
is
that.
there are ways to do it, but getting access to that on like your iPhone, for example,
it's
not as easy to do.
Yeah, it's either a crazy amount of work, or you have to trust.
Right. Well, and I guess my point isn't so much that you can't, but that it's hard, and it takes a certain degree of expertise to understand how. So for regular folks just using a thing, there's always going to be a little bit of trust baked into it. Mm-hmm. So so the question that you have to answer for yourself is, how much security do I need? Right. And you should base your own personal security off of a fair assessment of the kinds of trade-offs you want to make, because it's always going to be trade-offs.
Yeah, this is something that I learned in the military about, like, I was in the Navy for like 9 years working on TS clearance stuff, and so I learned a lot about security stuff and sanitation and encryption and things like that. And what we were always taught was basically like, and Joe, we talk about it on DIN sometimes in the context of not encryption, but just building the system. Is you're never going to be perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. If somebody has physical access to something, they're probably going to get into it. What you need to do is make yourself the hard target, make the bad guys go somewhere else where it's easier, because you're such a pain in the ass that it's just not worth their time.
Right.
And that's all you can really do, is just make it. And there's a balance between convenience and security too, where at some point, if you make it too secure, and I mean, maybe nothing's ever too secure, but if you can't use the thing, maybe it's pointless to have it as secure as it is, and you need to back off and figure out where your trade-offs are and where your risks really are. And maybe you don't advertise your risks, but you make a decision personally about, okay, which risks am I willing to manage, leave open for use or for whatever reason I need to, but then just watch that risk and keep an eye on it, kind of thing.
Yep.
Dave, that's a really interesting point, man. Imagine the trade-off between privacy and free expression then at that point, right? What do I want to be able to say? Who do I want to be able to say it to? And how do I balance that against privacy? Like, is the degree to which we can protect our privacy is also the degree to which we can comfortably speak our ideas, without worrying about being compromised, especially if you're a dissident in Hong Kong versus just somebody here in the for now freer part of the world, saying something about Hong Kong.
And to me, that's kind of a use case for a pseudonym, right? Maybe you want someone to know that you are a native Hong Kong resident, or and you don't want people to know who you are, but you want to be at least, like, you don't want to know, you want people to know where your house is, but you want to know where your city is, so that you can say, no, I'm here. You don't know who I am, but I'm here. And so that maybe you can communicate your ideas to other people who are here, and then they can see that they're who they're talking to without really identifying the particular individual.
Right. Well, just goes to show how important privacy is to free expression, right? Like, it's sort of the baseline right that secures all of it. That's one of the reasons privacy is so important, and the technology that guards it is something that we should really all be concerned about.
Yeah. And by the way, if you read, I mean, most issues of people who really get hit by totalitarian regimes, it's a weird thing, because it almost feels like that here sometimes. I remember just starting to open up politically under a doxed account on Reddit and then Twitter, and it was always a question of, how will this affect my future ability to get a job or to do business with someone, right?
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah,
a
it isn't
weird
about
thing that shouldn't be there, right? But and it
and
also,
that,
we should say kudos to the I will say that at least, and I'm sure there are others, but like say Signal is amazing because a normal person can use it, and it's actually in the plane. I mean, it's not encrypted if you're using it with someone who isn't using it, right? But as soon as they are using it as well, that they join and set up, then it's just automatically encrypted, and that's a very good thing. And Telegram is similar, that you can just use it like normal, but if you need to have a conversation where and we've done this before, where we have to transfer financial info. I have to give somebody a credit card or something like that. It's a really good way to do it because that it's at least encrypted as best it can be. So things like that are important for legitimate reasons too. So
That's a really interesting point. Like maybe a question for the room. What kind of privacy tools out there are there that you use that you think other people ought to know about? Because like we always use when we need to share something like a credit card number, one-time secret, which is a really great tool that lets you create something that self-destructs very rapidly. That you can share this, and it puts a layer of obfuscation between just the channel you're communicating in to say, I have this thing I need to share with you, and the thing you're actually trying to share that needs a little extra security itself.
Right.
So if anybody has any other tools they like, I think that would be a cool thing to get there.
I'm not
OneTimeSecret.com, by the way.
I'm pretty old school with the password protected RAR file.
It's a good one.
Yeah. I'm not up to date on a lot of them. I used to just look into them to experiment, just to know how things were working. But I do know that having a rooted Android phone is helpful, because you can do a lot of things that you can't do normally, and you can. It's just a Linux device at some point, so it becomes a very powerful tool when it's rooted. So interesting stuff.
On that note, I haven't used it yet, but I'm going to be using PinePhone, which is a non-Google Android phone, and it uses KDE Plasma, has a mobile overlay, and all the KDE tools on your typical Linux KDE desktop are you can use those, like the mail system, and it uses it has interface with the modem, make phone calls and things like that. So you can't access the Google App Store, but it could be that that's a good thing. And you can just have a Linux phone in your hand, and that's a PinePhone. There's some projects that can use, like if you have a OnePlus 6, that's compatible. Otherwise you're looking at buying. It's open hardware too, though. If you go to PinePhone's website, they're producing open hardware, open source phones, which is pretty cool. It's not encryption related specifically, but
it would enable it, though. I mean, it would enable a lot more things that you can get on the regular App Store.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Wow. I want to do that.
I mean, and anything that you send can also be manually encrypted. That's something that people don't necessarily always take the time to do, but can be done if you need that extra level of security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are some things you can do there to strengthen it as well. Like, you encrypt something twice, and anything that would be automated to look for any holes, might be a little bit more unlikely.
That's why the. Go ahead. Sorry.
I met two guys here in Puerto Rico that were looking for money for the project, where they had a new type of cell phone that uses the same security standard as, they said, the security that the U.S. government uses to guard the nuclear missile codes. And so it was, non-Android, non-Apple and all of this, right? So it was supposed to be kind of the next generation of the best encryption you could ever want. And so they were here kind of shopping it around and realizing there are a lot of, crypto billionaires here that would probably appreciate this thing. And I don't know when that'll come out or if, but I thought it was a very good idea for the crypto community.
And I'm going to plug Dragonchain. Just we partnered with Aquid in order to get this quantum safe encryption for rest and in transfer. And it's lab tested. It's pretty amazing stuff. And when we've spoken with Dr. Al in the past, it's been really interesting because there's some non-technical ways to describe how it works, and it's pretty cool. But it's a strange thing because the quantum menace appearing is starting to become very real. I mean, it's before it was always a theoretical if and when what could happen with Bitcoin, what could happen with my data that I need to protect, and that very much does become something that if you are a target of a nation state, it's an entirely different question, right?
Right.
And yet there are Google has one, IBM I think has one, right? So
and I think it's what you just said about being a target of a nation state. I think it's important to point out also that doesn't mean you're a bad guy. There's a lot of just in common thinking, there's a lot of like, oh, why would a country be after someone? Because Interpol is chasing them because they're a bad guy. No,
right.
You fucking live in Hong Kong and they're trying to kill you. You've done nothing wrong. You've done zero wrong. That's why.
Well, in this day and age, you can become a bad guy by memeing the wrong thing, right?
Right. Yeah. And especially in the U.S., I have this conversation with a lot of people. Every couple of months, we get into the conversation about like, no, people just haven't seen it here recently. And I love that cup. And so people don't think about like, no, other countries suck sometimes to live in, and you got to understand that that's what this is about.
I'll tell you this was banned.
Well, I wonder.
By our own vendor was banned.
Oh yeah, that shirt. I forgot about that with the hat on it because I had the hat and it was red.
It's a frog with a hat on it. They banned it.
Going to the conversation of Hong Kong, I always wondered that, and maybe one of you guys can answer this question, is whether even if they can't break your encryption, if they can tell you're using it. So basically, they could then say, oh, this guy's using some really strong form of encryption. We can't read it, but now we know he was probably guilty of something. So let's go, just go to his apartment.
Right.
And I've always been a fan. That's why I've always been a fan of things like Rubber Hose, which isn't really a thing anymore. I think it's still like ext2 file system era. But Assange made this encryption scheme called Rubber Hose that was for journalists and people that were trying to exfiltrate exfil data out of countries or whatever. And it was like an embedded file system, like a hidden file system where you would have a normal login. And so if you got inspected, you would just log in and you've got your normal computer or whatever. But if you logged in a different way, you would log into the encrypted version with your files and stuff. So it hid the fact that you had any encryption at all. And I forget the details, but it was a really, really cool concept, stuff like that, where it's, you addressing those kinds of questions, because there are nations who specifically outlaw encryption and just all encryption. It's illegal. So if you have anything encrypted, you're breaking the law just by default. That does exist.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that system was really neat because instead of returning an error when you guessed your encryption password wrong, it directed you to a vanilla version of the operating system and made it look like a successful login.
Let me open it up. Let me log in. Here you go.
Attack. That said, I think the most important thing to remember, especially if anybody's watching this, trying to figure out how to protect themselves better because they're doing something that they know is going to make them a target for a powerful group, whether it's a nation state or a criminal organization or anything. You are going to be exposed is the assumption that you should always be making. Right. The communications you need to make are the communications you need to make one way or the other to be effective at what you're trying to do. And they're out there with this power in order to silence you. So the question is, how can I be the most secure I can be? But you should never assume you've got bulletproof security. I probably sound like a broken record on that one, but I think that's a really important thing that people should know and sort of take to heart.
And companies and businesses too. Assuming that you're compromised and building a system with the assumption that it is in a hostile environment. It isn't safe because it's on your server. I mean, look at what China's doing with quantum computing. First, they had, the low orbit hypersonic missile that they showed off. And now they're saying, oh, by the way, we're way ahead in quantum too. They've got both types of like the super cool superconductor type of quantum computer. And they have a photon based one that is almost as good, it seems like. And they're, in parallel, they're showing publicly they have these. So in secret, are they already in our systems? Are they already in our encryption? And they just don't want to let us know that? That's what we do. You know, the FBI recently infiltrated, what is it, R-Evil, that group that was producing a lot of malware and stuff. Turns out they had the decryption keys for months, and they were just letting victims be victims so that they wouldn't expose the fact that they had access to their stuff.
That sounds
Right.
familiar.
So that could be, at any moment, that can be true for you.
Next question.
Yes.
Ready?
We're
All
on
right.
it for a while.
From Angel Breaker, how important is the encryption algorithm for blockchains since they're ASICs and quantum computers? Right. Who wants to take it first?
We talk about that in our company, and we always sort of make a joke about it. Where you ever heard the idea that if you're with a group of people and there's a bear chasing you, you only have to be faster than the slowest person in the group.
Yes.
It's the same thing with quantum computing, right? As long as some other blockchain is more vulnerable than yours, they're the ones that will be hacked first when quantum computing is fast enough.
That's funny. You're almost using them as a canary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes a canary. But, you were talking about China and their quantum computers. One of the things that I've always made me paranoid is, they've been really pushing Bitcoin out of their economy. And it made me worried that they will basically allow Bitcoin to become very ingrained in the rest of the world's economy. And if they can basically then crash Bitcoin and it won't affect them as much, or at least have that threat if they get quantum computing first. And so I think it's really important
Well, I thought of that last night,
that we
actually.
don't wait for that to happen. Yeah.
And I think the thing to keep in mind too, so that people don't get too worried about it, the other side of this is, we are a hard fork away on any blockchain from making updates to that algorithm that secure it against these types of threats. So they're thinking about it in terms of the same sort of 0-day logic that they think about the exploits they have now, right? The second that they use a weapon, that weapon gets burned.
I really wonder
that's an
too,
especially expensive one to spend on.
What do you
quantum.
think the time difference will be between the technology being developed for quantum computing and it becoming available to the public? Because I think we're going to hear company announcements and government announcements, and then there's probably going to be a gap of a couple years until some hacker group could be really using it. I mean, obviously you have state-sponsored hacker groups that are something to be worried about, but other than that, I think there's going to be a pretty big gap in between accessibility to all of us and the technology becoming available.
Right. There aren't going to be quantum computers in pocket smartphones anytime soon.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, because not the kind of quantum computers you might think of, but something that really snuck up on me was this photon-based, light-based circuitry that is exponentially faster than what we have today. And it's something that's actually feasible to put in a non-supercooled circuit that is, it's hard to manufacture.
There's some really interesting stuff. I don't know. This is maybe because it's out of memory, so I'm probably not going to get all this right. But there are very interesting technologies with light that when they broadcast, that when they do various things with the phase of the light, that they can actually detect, and there's no way around it. You can detect man in the middle attacks, right? So there's some really cool tech out there that's pretty old, right? And that's why I haven't watched some of those things for a while, or just reading articles from way back.
We actually
then you never hear about the tech. Why? Because it's probably being employed somewhere that for obvious reasons, right?
I think that actually the China threat is over exaggerated because people like to scare each other and all that. But some of the logic behind it is that China has 1.4 billion people and the United States only has 300 million or whatever it is. So therefore they have some advantage, but it's really not the case. The United States and Europe together have this incredible soft power of having most of the best engineers in the rest of the world coming. I have a master's degree in physics, and I actually worked in the Central for Research in Electro-Optics and Lasers in Orlando. And most of the best physicists there were from other countries, and they weren't even Americans. And that's the same, I think, in industry. So
the
I think
crazy thing with China is
probably as far as engineering goes,
China sees everything those engineers accomplished. Because the theft with them stealing IP, that's real. I mean, it's very real. So I mean, gosh, we can import all the best engineers in the world, and you're absolutely right. We do that. China steals everything they do.
Transparency is key because for some of that, it is the fact that our politicians are owned, a lot of our industries are owned by nation states, and it's a very interesting thing, and we don't have any transparency in our government.
This is why I think it's important to promote openness in technology more broadly. Like, we're big proponents of open source code, but open source science is another thing that really, makes sure that you don't end up with any kind of, huge advantage on one side or the other. And if you can get people to commit to doing open research and sharing results and sharing how they achieve those results, that is a thing that you can, as an individual, influence in your government without running afoul of any of the tripwires they set up for dissidents. That is an open area of advocacy that regular people can make and stand for. And if we care about that issue, politicians will be forced to care about it too, in a way that's really kind of hard to set up a counter argument against, because it's very similar to mutually assured destruction, right? If we're open with our research, then the weapons that we can use against each other are shared.
Yeah, so I was talking the other day to a world-class drone expert, and he was saying that people often think that the best drones in the world are going to be developed by Amazon or Walmart or Chinese government or DJI or one of these things. And he was saying that's really not the case. He said, in his experience, in every type of technology, it's the very small teams that are coming out of universities that always have the best, latest stuff, because any big organization bogs down their researchers in bureaucracy to really be able to make the choices they want and to take the risks that they want. And so open countries that have more freedom and more sort of push towards entrepreneurial efforts have a huge advantage in sort of developing the latest and greatest technologies.
100%. I mean, that's why we open source all of our stuff with Rivet, because it's people look at us cross-eyed when we say that we open source the technology we build our product on, and they're going, well, don't you worry about people copying you? It's like, well, actually, no, not really, because if they tried, they'd have to learn all about it and implement it, and then we'd have more than one company using the standard, right? That's a win for our technology approach, but
you can also
keeping
open
it
source
closed.
And you can open source and require a license to use it too from your competitors.
Right. Well, and keeping it closed is an administrative burden that bogs people into one way of thinking, and that's a real advantage of open, just from a practical standpoint too. So like it's not just an act of altruism to open up your technology. It's a competitive advantage.
Definitely strategic. Yep.
And also, it's not like if somebody copies your work and forks your open source code into their own project that they're also going to get your team. They also have to do a lot of work and have a lot of time.
I will tell you that's key, especially in
Mm-hmm.
these technologies. Whether you're talking about encryption or you're talking about blockchain, we found that far more often it's a conceptual gap. It is that our competitors do not have the slightest clue about how we're using this tech. And in years, and I'm talking years gap, where it's like you're it's like you're an alien talking to them. They don't understand why you would ever use this technology for X, Y, Z, because they think of everything very narrowly about everything they've seen. This is how Ethereum does it. This is how Bitcoin does it. That's what they do, right? And then when you talk about regulators, someday we'll have a show on regulation, maybe. When you talk about regulators, that's even more so, because they come in thinking this is this, and it's not at all. And so you have to explain here's what we're doing. And
that's why we have two financial regulators fighting over a generalized technology called NFTs and how to regulate those. It's like trying to figure out how to regulate email in the context of securities law. Doesn't make any sense.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Angel Breaker, and if you guys if I'm moving too fast, you tell me, all right? Angel Breaker, is there any technology out there that can provide me, quote unquote, proof of encryption as a quality sign? How could that work?
Eternal has it, right? Yeah. Eternal gives you $1 value.
Yeah, you could do something like that. It wouldn't be for the encryption. It is for the proof, right? The proof
right, but the proof, it's related though.
Yeah,
it's not the encryption really. It's just, but it's related to, like encryption is the reason that it takes all of that proof of work,
and there is, encryption itself, you can prove to yourself that it's encrypted. The thing you can't prove is what we talked about before, man in the middle, anything that might, if you're using an app on your phone that somebody could just have the plain text version, doesn't care about the encryption. They could store the encryption, break it later. There is an interesting idea that goes down to, okay, on the one hand, theoretically, you could go full on Unabomber, get a shed somewhere in the middle of nowhere and build everything from scratch yourself and know that at least you have an encryption that wouldn't be automatically breakable, right? That, if there is some hole in one of the curves or, some of the cryptography, you could know, okay, well, I built this. They're not looking for X, right? And I do wonder, the idea I would bring up is that if you had an app that had and you'd have to work, I'm not a cryptography expert, right? But if you worked with a cryptographer, all of the variety in the things that they do in standards, whether it's a hashing algorithm standard or whether it's a signature or encryption standard, there are variables, there are constants, there are things that they use. Theoretically, if you could distribute in a deterministic way that every time I send you a message, Greg, I'm going to alter a couple of pieces of how the encryption works, and somehow you already know that, right? There are a bunch of different ways to communicate that or to negotiate that. But if that was different for every single message, or at least for every pair of people messaging each other, that would be a huge value, because whoever is automatically sitting back and just pulling all the traffic would have a much, much bigger job, right? They probably find a hole, but it's always the
well, what you're talking about adds a level of complexity that is possible, and that I think probably has been created already. Like, you might say you might develop a shared secret between the two of you, that we're going to look at the first 3 digits after the decimal place at the close of NASDAQ on this index, and take those 3 numbers, and that's going to be a modifier, right? So that anything that you encrypt is also going to be modified. Your keys are going to be modified by some transformation based on those numbers, and we're going to check them every day before we open it up. But even in creating that shared secret, you open the possibility that will be exposed, right? So there's a degree of there's a degree of risk of information loss anytime you add that kind of layer of security that still doesn't give you anything perfect. So I'd say that you can make things more secure by adding more cost and more complexity up to a point, but you can never really draw an assumption that anything's perfect.
Do you guys remember a couple months ago there was that program? It was an encrypted messenger. It was actually put out by the FBI and the Australian law enforcement agencies, and that used a really weird way to convince people that it was encrypted, where it probably would pass most tests. It was sending the messages encrypted, so people would try to check if it really was, and it would pass. And then it's like when the phone was idle for a couple hours, so when someone was likely asleep, it would send screen recordings, unencrypted, to the government. So they were sending encrypted messages, and then the screen showing plain text was being recorded in a video file and sent at a time when the phone was idle as far as the user was concerned. Right. So that would probably pass all tests. I mean, I never have my monitoring the traffic on my phone, and it's been 2 hours since I touched it, Yeah. Like that would work, and it did. There's always creative ways to get around us feeling secure, Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's what it comes down to is a trade-off. Again, like you need to know how secure you need to be, and how much risk you're taking in the kind of things that you're saying. And that I guess it cuts both ways, because if you're saying something that you just want to, you just don't want to have out there because you just generally want to have privacy. You don't know what you might want to keep private later. That's probably a lower bar than like, I've got plans for a rally for democracy in Hong Kong, and I need to make sure that I'm safe as we plan it. Those are 2 different levels. So you just sort of have to pick and choose how much expense you're going to undergo versus how much risk you're taking by exposing yourself.
And it's getting cheaper and more accessible. That's the important thing. It's like random people can now use it basically for free if they spend some time on education for themselves, which is also free. There's fewer gatekeepers for that as well. You got to be careful where you get your education from, of course, but yeah.
Yep. Well, and also to Ross's point, like, be wary of the new a little bit if you're talking about security. There's a premium on ways of securing yourself that are tried and true and tested and have been around for a long time, but just have a lot of mathematical security to them from the standpoint of strong encryption. Those technologies are going to be your best bet when it comes to making sure that you're not accidentally buying into this new honeypot.
Right.
I like the idea of going back to analog media again. Honestly, like the best way to avoid people breaking into your system is to use VHS tapes or something like that.
I was going to say ham radio, but it's very interesting that they every government will know, because you have to have a license to broadcast and all that stuff. And I've never done any of that stuff, but I remember I was always interested back in the day when I was just a dev, and some of the Linux people were talking about that you can literally use ham radio to get email where there's no access, and this was in the late 90s, right? So really, anyway,
they'll come after you, man. Pirate radio gets taken down real fast.
Right.
If you want to meet your local FBI officer, don't register your ham radio. They'll show up.
I've been thinking about getting into radio a little bit and getting into ham because, I remember in the Arab Spring in Egypt when they shut down the internet to keep people from organizing and stuff, there were radio operators who were bridging communities with the internet, like point to point over ham. To get people on, I don't know what they were using, whether it was Twitter or Facebook or WhatsApp or something like that, but to get them communicating again. I thought that was great, to have like the cheaper and the easier the technology gets, going to Goodwill to get the old routers that people drop off that they don't want anymore. Those things can be amazing in an adversarial situation where, all the infrastructure's been shut down on you. You can make your own neighborhood infrastructure that way, that kind of thing.
Yep. I always like the idea of taking old cell phones and repurposing them for that, just rooting them and having them be signal repeaters that you can just sort of toss out the window. Whenever they run out of battery, they're done. But there are enough of those discarded every day that if you had the right program, you could keep the battery on for a long time.
I feel like it'd be a cool survival game, like a near future, everything's been turned off, but you have to tinker with all the repurposed tech stuff. Everything is repurposed.
Yep. Life hack. All right. Okay. So next question, Foost. This is gonna be a hard one. I don't know. We have maybe some things we can say about this. What are the largest drawbacks for SHA-256? Seems as if everyone and everything uses this cryptographic hash these days. What are your thoughts? I can't remember if are there any known collisions on.
I was just trying to look that up. I remember there was a Chinese researcher. I don't know what her name is, and I couldn't find it just now. But I remember watching a DEF CON recording where they were talking about 256 having a collision. And so they were basically, marking it off, saying, all right, that's dead. Everybody move to 512. But now I can't find any references of that.
I would say
known. It says no known. Okay.
I would say the more people using a thing, the more risky it is when it comes to encrypted products. So the fact that everyone and everything seems to be using it is probably something that you could highlight as a problem if you're looking for the most secure communication channel. I sadly do not have the necessary expertise to go into much more depth than that. But
I do think that they, it's the same thing as with operating systems. That if you are using Windows, you're much more likely to have attacks because it's easy. If you're using, and it's easy because everyone's using Windows. It was always that Macs would have a lower rate because not as many people were using them. And there are reasons beyond that too. People would always say, Linux isn't that hot. It's just that nobody uses it. And like, well, no, it gives me more controls. I have more ability if I know what I'm doing to lock myself down. Right.
Right.
So
as long as you're not running on Intel, because they built in a lot of exploits at the chip level. That later kind of got exposed, but
that's rough.
I would say kind of just the latter goes like most used will be the most targeted. most targeted will be most likely to be cracked. And then you got to kind of ask yourself, do you believe that the person who cracks it will be white hat? If not, there could be like a year when bad guys know how to break this and you had no idea,
Yeah.
Yep.
There's actually
they won't use it when they go ahead. Sorry.
There's actually a little protective hack you can supposedly use for Bitcoin and many of these, which is that if you place your crypto in an address that's never been sent from, it's much more difficult for the quantum computers to break it. So for some reason, sending from that address makes it more vulnerable. So if you have a bunch of Bitcoin or whatever it is, apparently you can just make a new address, send it to there, and then don't touch it. Don't ever send from it. And kind of use it in a way, it's sort of like a cold wallet in a way. And that won't get hacked because and somebody else's address will get hacked. I mean, once that happens, maybe the whole value of everything is suspect. But it's just one little thing people can do.
And 2 points on that I don't want to. I don't want to. I mean, all of this is from memory, but there were 2 points to know about that. That there was a double hashing that I think is related to that because there is an exposure of the public key on a cent, or so that you can prove that the balance is owned by you, whatever. And I don't want to, because I can't remember the details, but that's really interesting. That because I remember that from back in the day, because I had always wondered, what are the potential weaknesses here if I'm going to try to hold all of this Bitcoin in one place, right? That's good info though. Cool. Right. You go next. JP12X. This one can't count because it's not a question, but we will answer it. Has the lot been tipped for old episodes? We just turned on tipping this week, and I will say the process with the Roundtable is that we have a set supply based upon all the prior episodes. We never said, there are a lot in advance of that. So we have to also add something on the back end admin interface to create new lot. And we don't know if we're going to do that monthly. Right now it's a developer task to create the lot, and then we'll start tipping it in at the end of the week. So just know it'll start becoming faster, but it's all recorded, so it'll be there soon. If it isn't already. And it should show up in your wallet on debt. Okay, Street Meat. Are you aware of any projects trying to implement homomorphic encryption?
No, I'm not aware of any projects doing that.
What is that?
I know some that have experimented with it. If I am not incorrect, and I'm might look like an idiot here if I am, but I believe that it is the encryption that allows you to have, how do I best describe this? That has a shield that it can do mathematical or other operations on the data without exposing the elements of the data in what is encrypted. Right. So you could send over, here's a payload, and the system, without knowing my actual values, could still do the math, the formula that it needs to give me whatever award or let me in or whatever else. I've known some people experimenting with it. Early on at Disney, we actually had a very small project that looked at it with blockchain, and this would have been 2015, pretty early. We didn't get funding for that. We didn't really go too far into it, but we did look at it for various purposes. And I will say, and this is me, right? This is a software architect that anything that you're doing with encryption, there are a radical amount of unknown unknowns. There are tons of things that you don't know, and in fact, it's philosophical that it's possible that it's not even that it isn't even possible to counter that, because you're doing things that everybody knows at least the pattern that these cryptographic algorithms will break in time. It's just a matter of compute power, strategy. It's the same it's the same as offense, defense in regular weaponry in history, right? That you always have a better defense, which is countered by a better offense, and it keeps going as technology increases when humans are trying to kill each other, right? And it's the same thing with software. And therefore, get to my point finally, as a software architect, it is key, it is very, very powerful to arrange things structurally where you can and not rely on cryptography. I mean, you rely on cryptography, but you always have to assume, this will be broken in so many years. We have to, you have to know these things in advance if it's sensitive info. And it's better, like say at our structure in Dragonchain is a perfect example of this, that the main security architecturally is structural, because I think everything that you can do it ends up being a quantifiable known thing. Look, if I put this data over here and I protect it in this way, like typically I've been at a place before where they had this really long conversation about how to handle their firewalls and various other things on a system that was used once a month for some purpose, right? I'm like, guys, it's running in the closet. We could just unplug the cable, right? He's like, you can either power it down or just unplug the internet from it, and you are far, far better than any firewall could ever be, right?
Yep.
Right.
Sneakernet. That's what we always called it in the
Right,
Navy.
so
Sneakernet.
that's a huge thing, and that's the first thing that people should look at if they're trying to secure something. And it's the same thing. If I have some sensitive info, I don't pass a note in class where the teacher can pull it, right? I mean,
Right.
it's where you put it. So anyway, interesting stuff.
I would say this could be really an interesting case for something like storage on IPFS, where you wanted to store sensitive information, but you still wanted to be able to index it. I would imagine that there has to be a project out there looking into that, because it seems to be the most obvious, like straightaway use case is, like how do I systematically index something that I don't want to decrypt when I submit it to this decentralized data store? And homomorphics would be really valuable for that. But the complexity there probably puts that more in the ambit of the IBMs and Microsofts of the world in terms of hiring the right kind of research expertise and funding those projects, because there's just a lot of pure research that has to be done still for that to be something that people can regularly use. There's not a GitHub library that I can point you to that
Right.
will make that super easy.
Another thing to bring up on this it's super interesting, even logically, even if you aren't into math or crypto or anything else, that there's a known pattern that if you're trying to secure a system, that it is generally a negative to design things that gain security by obscurity. That if you're relying on people not knowing the method that you are using to secure something because it's unique, and most of the time that kind of stands. But it's really funny because something like port knocking, which if anybody knows what port knocking is, it is literally, I'm going to, in the range of all of these ports that are running on a server, I'm going to ping them in some unique way that hopefully changes over time, that lets a port open that I can now access it. And it's such an interesting thing because cool. It's an infinite amount of possibilities, that the key is literally just it's an obscurity thing. And you have the human element is probably the attack vector there, but it's there are so many of those, and I would tell you that I guarantee those are being used by large authorities to do various things, because like say a phone home, like Ross mentioned on that, that's an extremely dumb way to just send in plain text the data. It would be much more it'd be harder to detect if it's sending small snippets of things that can be used to reconstruct something on the other side, or to gain access to their cloud storage or something else, right? Because it wouldn't.
That feels like a Cicada 3301 type of Easter egg hunt puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Like figure out the port knocking order.
Yeah.
To light up these ports.
And it's actually
based on the last clue. That would be kind of a neat game to play, almost like a missed puzzle.
And by the way, before I forget, the reason I think that even brings up, we brought that in as a project, and I think we were still inside of Disney. Yes, where the strategy there could be similar, radically hard to break, but it would basically be chain knocking. That you would basically throw a particular transaction on Bitcoin. to an address never used before. So another one on Ethereum to an address you never. Things that cost money. Why? Because with regular port knocking, there's no economics involved. I could just keep doing it. The only thing I have to do is make sure that somebody's not watching. But with that, it would actually cost you for every attempt. And so you'd have to start, okay, it didn't work, start over.
Yeah, to me, the danger of port knocking is not that somebody could try all different combinations and get in. The danger is that, like, if you run the same knock twice, 3 times, 4 times, any kind of passive, anybody that's just watching traffic, especially with AI emerging and things like that, you're gonna start pulling these patterns out. It's like, wait a minute, there's this certain pattern happens, and then port 80 opens every time this pattern hits. You know what I mean?
Yep,
so you're just going to have people. It's like standing in a busy, you got a group of people coming home from a party, and you knock the secret knock on the door, and now everybody knows your knock. That kind of thing. So you'd have to rotate, just like rotating keys. You'd have to have a pre-compiled rotating knock pattern, basically, where every time you did one, it burned that knock or something, and you had to
So someone needs to try that on x.com to see if that blank page is actually just waiting for somebody to get the right server.
Knock on your display, knock on your screen.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes. Do you guys want to just close out? Say the are we going to do lightning round? Do you guys want to? What do you guys think? Who can stick around for like 10 more minutes if you want? Okay, so let's say Dave. I'm just going to go down the line. What's coming up on Den? What do you want people to know?
So I actually just yesterday started our episode 1 of, we're doing a Wednesday weekly morning show at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'm going to be posting these up on Den in the Den layer. I just posted one up today, so I'll try to do it the day after, so that just like this, you can ask some questions and things like that. And it's going to be all about Den and denizen related stuff. Next week, I'm going to go over tips and tricks for content creators, talk about formatting, talk about Markdown, and then talk about some of the tools that I use to make it look prettier, and then how you can embed images in your post and not let them be subject to, like, some website took it down, so now your picture doesn't show up anymore. Using CS Skynet to decentralize your storage and still be able to be in control of your media and all that. So that'll be Wednesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. And I'm even going to put a little tool that you can click on to see where that is in your time zone, since that's always confusing. So that's what I've got every Wednesday at 9.
Perfect. Jeff, what's new with Divi?
Well, actually, what I can talk about right now, I think this is kind of exciting, and I talked to you about it a couple of years ago when I first started the project, but I'm developing NFT-based animated comic books, and it's also a big problem in the industry. I actually talked to the former head of DC Comics, and he was super excited about it. He thought it was brilliant and solving a big problem, because one of the problems with comics is that younger users, we're basically losing generations of comic book collectors, because younger people, they have so many choices. They have a million video games, things are more interactive, and so the comic books we're developing, each page is basically a website. It's HTML5, and so we can put little games in there. We can make them interactive. The stuff moves. There's sound, and we're doing these as NFTs. And what's cool about it is we can basically use them as funding. So we can basically launch the comic books as or the comic book covers as NFTs. People can buy them, speculate on them, trade them, and then wait until we finish the comic, and then we can airdrop to them the rest of the finished comic. So it becomes a funding source. So we're building a whole platform to do that. So it's one of the things I need to talk to you about, Joe, because originally when we talked about doing this, your dragon was so ideal for this because of your past association with Disney. We're getting closer and closer to release, so I need to talk to you about your NFT project and stuff, because it's going to be multi-chain.
I have tons.
And that's awesome.
I have tons of ideas from when you talked to me before, because it's so exciting. There's so many cool things
it would actually,
you can do. It's amazing.
As we were sitting here, I was actually thinking, it'd be really cool is to actually make just like a single comic that's like a little story about your dragon logo. Kind of make it the dragon into a hero, right, of some kind. Yes. Maybe you could come up with an idea and just make something, and then release it with your NFT program on Dragonchain. Right. So that would be fun to do. So
we will talk.
So people that are interested, go to lightningworks.io. Lightningworks.io.
Excellent. Right on. Greg, what's new with Rivet?
All right. So anybody who's interested ought to go to docs.plugeth.org. It's plugeth.org. That is the docs page for our open source plugin extension for Geth. So we forked Geth one last time, ideally, to support Go plugins. And then we've created a framework through which you can create plugins using Go that extend the capabilities of Geth. So going forward, it's a community task to maintain the plugeth fork and an individual project's task to only maintain their plugin. So it takes away that technical overhead necessary to create custom functionality for the most popular Ethereum client and one of the most popular template clients for a lot of other blockchains. This is now out there for people to use, and we're excited to see contributions coming in. So it's right out there for people to take a look at.
Excellent. That's really exciting stuff. Ross, any good stories coming up?
Yeah, a couple good ones already published on Global Crypto Press. People are quitting their day jobs and buying homes with the money that they are earning from play-to-earn crypto games. It's finally happening. It's becoming a job. And some really interesting stuff out there. I'll just touch on it real quick. People are buying, it's like $3,000 to get into these games, which is the big criticism right now. Is a lot of money to start up because you have to have a few NFTs to get in. But people are actually working these accounts like their day jobs, where now people will take shifts. They'll have like 5 people each do, 3 or 4 hour shifts on the same account. So this account is now playing 24 hours a day earning, and then they're splitting the money. They're treating it like a real business, and it's crazy how much they're earning with it. That, and then you also may have heard CoinMarketCap was hacked. I go into this a little debate on why I think it wasn't. It looks like people who use their password in one place also use the same password on CoinMarketCap, and these people simply ran it through a cracking program, took everyone whose password they had, narrowed it down to a list of passwords that also worked on CoinMarketCap, and then are selling this list on the dark web of CoinMarketCap users, but the site was never hacked. That makes sense.
Wow. Yeah.
So crazy stuff going on there, and that's going to be, like the Ledger situation where that email list got out. People know these are people with crypto, and from that point on, they were flooded with scam after scam, virus after virus. That's about to happen to about 2 million people.
Wowzers.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback on what
I never
Ross
signed up
for with the play to earn stuff. A couple of people that I've been talking to about DIN didn't quite get the way that it was gamified and the way that it was tooled as a tool. Treat it like a play to earn video game, and you will succeed. It's just basically set up that way. Learn the rules and then figure out how to use them, and you're gonna make some money. It's basically a play to earn game, but it's a social media site instead of a typical video game.
Right.
Yep, the game is great content that people like.
And you don't have to earn anything. I mean, you don't have to buy anything to get into it.
Right.
There's zero.
There's a key,
monetary
very
friction.
interesting token model that allows us to do that, so that a person is throttled, but it's a very natural way. And I'll say,
double plug there.
You should join us. We just changed the format. And it's every other week right now. The DEN governance call is this afternoon, at least in West Coast time, and it's very interesting because some of the things, and we're going to demo the new tipping functionality, which is going to be very amazing because you can tip ownership of these layers. It's not just tipping a token with the utility inside. So, but with governance, there's going to be some really interesting stuff happening on DIN coming up, and so that's this afternoon. I don't know everything we're going over, but it'll be good. So okay, that's it. So let's do quick lightning round. Is that all right? We go to 10 minute after. Is that good?
I'm down for whatever.
Okay. So first up, Jared, to understand cryptocurrencies, people have to understand how encryption works. What are some of the positives and negatives of a population that understands encryption? Does it make it difficult to subjugate? Would it make a population less secure from extremists as a population is encrypting everything? How can a government function? How should governments change with well-informed population? Now, remember, it's lightning round, so we're going to go straight down the line. So, Dave, anything to say?
I think that education is such a fundamental problem across the board that it can only be good if people understand how the technology works more widely across the board. It's a good thing, and it would make society more resilient to everything, probably.
Yep. I think transparency is good. So my take on this is the more people understand how to use this tech, the better. That transparency is good across the board, and about subjugation. That frankly, it would probably be better if our government was more transparent. Jeff.
Yeah, from my perspective, like I don't like this idea at all. This creeps me out. I don't like the idea that people that are somehow smarter or better at math are somehow going to get an advantage all the time, right? I'm much more interested in developing products wherever that levels the playing field. You don't have to worry about encryption, that your stuff is just safe, so that people that aren't so math oriented or maybe not as intelligent aren't constantly at risk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Greg?
That's very true, but I would say also, a society that has less ignorance in it is going to have less atrocity in it. The more knowledge that we have, the better. And governments will have to adapt by becoming less paternalistic, and they're just going to have to deal with a more informed society as a thing that is good, that they don't need to help. So,
Ross.
I think it can only be a positive. One thing that this reminded me of is the FBI report that was leaked, where they are venting their frustration with Monero transactions because they cannot tell what they're doing because of the encryption. And I love the idea of a government with very little power to see anything that the population is doing. And as far as that factor making it less secure against extremists, those are the kind of people who will seek ways to hide what they're doing regardless. So it's going to be one method or another. They are going to find some way to be underground. What it does prevent is the innocent people just being snooped on for pure power trip purposes, So as encrypted as possible, I'm all for it. Population as informed as possible is great.
Yep, totally true. Okay, M. Ladizi, question: how encryption can help the security of authorization of document signatures? How blocks and clouds are so unreachable? Dave.
It's the only way you can, I think, is with encryption, right? I don't know how else to do it other than to reference something that was the original document that was encrypted at the time, and to see that it hasn't changed since that time until you received it. If I understand the question correctly.
Yeah. In encryption and cryptographic signing, which is the alternate use, same logical thing with encryption, in my opinion, is needed, is necessary. I am flabbergasted that the legal world hasn't, on the one hand, officially said a signed document needs to be this, but even on the informal side, that they aren't just doing it. I mean, it's like you don't have to officially have an act of Congress to say you have to do this. You could just start doing it. And it blows my mind that I've never met any legal counsel that uses this or does anything. In fact, they're more likely to lose documents and not be able to actually show a chain of custody than anything else. So, okay. Jeff?
Yeah, so there's a very interesting protocol being developed right now called Keychain that's being developed by Craig Sellers, who created the first NFT with the V atoms and created Tether, the first stable coin. He's a super brilliant guy, and Keychain is basically addressing some of this to some extent, where it basically allows the user to protect a wide variety of types of different documents and different parts of their own personal data, to control of that, and to have granular control over what gets to who. Like, for example, they can give access to banks for certain things, but they can give different stuff to their family. They could give even more to their lawyer, and this kind of thing. It all sort of works automatically. And he's been developing this for a couple of years. It's kind of his next, because of what he's done before, I kind of assume it's like a huge deal, and I'm very impressed with it. But it sounds like something that will be very valuable. But I just hope it's not going to be too complicated like so many of these things are.
Yeah,
true. Greg?
I'd say authorization is always inherently a kind of insecure thing. How encryption can help is through making authentication easier to do and more seamless, so that you can authenticate whether someone has a right to authorize more frequently, more on the points where where you need to have those things happen, so that you don't have as many general broad security gates that let somebody into a whole theme park of authorization opportunities. And that will ultimately help authorizations become more secured.
Right on. Let's see, Ross.
I would say if this is even a concern, I'm assuming it's like sensitive or private documents. And in that case, I think the chain of custody being absolutely logged when 100% certain is probably a huge factor. You're going to know it went from one person to you, and that's that. And that would probably be the biggest upside.
Right on. Okay, so we're at 10. I think that's it. Is that all right? And I will go. By the way, I'm going to go and upvote everything in here at even amounts, just so you know. I haven't had a chance to even do that yet. Thanks everyone for joining. Let me go through the notes here. Make sure if you haven't already joined the blockchain roundtable layer in Den to ask questions for the next episode. And I believe, okay, the next episode, the theme, am I correct about this? If it is updated in my notes, okay, is blockchain and voting. All right, so, and if you can share this episode, push it around. The more views this episode gets by the showtime next week, the more all of the hosts and you topic contributors will get. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share. I think that's it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now, more than ever, our data is at risk. Our supply chains are in jeopardy. Our systems are broken, and businesses feel powerless. Dragonchain gives you a different way, a safer way, a better way, and you have power over your data. Dragonchain gives you proof in an untrusted world. Build now at dragonchain.com. America's blockchain.